David Shrier is a futurist, an author, and an entrepreneur. He is a lecturer at MIT Media Lab, where he teaches the first graduate FinTech class in North America. He is also the founder and CEO of Distilled Analytics that improves financial decision-making and enables global financial inclusion, bringing 3.5 billion people and millions of small businesses into the financial system. David was a managing director of Connection Science, where he helped to create the Trust Data Consortium and apply big data to understanding and managing innovation, both in companies and societies. He has spent his career leading innovation initiatives, creating new businesses, coaching entrepreneurs and investors, and working with great companies such as NBC Universal, Disney, Ernst & Young, and Starwood Hotels and Resorts, as well as leading private equity and VC funds. For the past few years, he has been addressing humanity's grand challenges by helping innovators themselves to innovate and deliver positive change within populations in health, financial services, and urban systems. He has a degree in biology and theatre arts from Brown University. David, it's a real pleasure, a real privilege to have you here. You're my first MIT professor that I'm talking to, since I've been doing my business. So wonderful, wonderful privilege to be here. So congratulations.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I am certainly someone who teaches the FinTech class at MIT, and I've had a tremendous experience bringing that online to 130 countries.
What is your exact role there?
So I created the course, I lead the instructional team, and have collaborated with new technology platforms to reshape what the online learning experience is like.
How would you describe FinTech? How would you define FinTech? Because we all have different versions of it, and we all think we know what it is, but what's the true version of it?
No, that's a great question. So I have a loose constructionist approach to defining FinTech. So not a tight constructionist. So a tight constructionist would say FinTech is only this and it cannot be this other thing, and puts it in a very tight box. I would say FinTech is either something that is a technology solution adopted by financial services industry, or it's a financial services company whose business is principally driven by technology. And I don't mean, for example, HSBC or Emirates NDB, but rather I mean like a crowdfunding website would be a financial services company in terms of its actual business, but it uses technology in an interesting way in order to deliver that service.
So all these business model innovations that are going on around Uber or Airbnb and others, are they on the edge of FinTech or not quite?
Yeah, so someone like Airbnb uses FinTech, but they themselves are not a FinTech company. So there's another interesting company that we do a lot of work with called Hub Culture. And among other things, they host special thought leader events all over the world, and therefore they have to have housing for people who go to those events. Yeah. And they decided that to build their community, they were going to create their own digital currency and their own digital identity system. So they have an asset-backed digital currency that's called VEN. But I would not call them a FinTech company. They're someone, despite their many financial innovations, they're really a community enablement platform.
Moving forward, the word blockchain gets thrown around, Bitcoin gets thrown around. We don't really understand it. How is blockchain, how would you define blockchain, and how is it likely to impact our lives?
Well, so I'll give you a functional definition, because I'm not interested in the textbook definition. The textbook definition is not really that useful to you or me.
Yeah.
So functionally, the way to think about blockchain, and particularly in the context of financial services, is around ledgers, right? So what's a bank? A bank is someone who keeps a little record book, and you give them some of your money and they write it down in the book and they say, you have money with us. And then someone else comes along and says, I want to build that new apartment building. And so the bank takes a bunch of your money and my money and other people's money and provides it to that developer, and they make a little entry in the ledger book. So that is what's known as a centralized ledger.
Right.
Blockchain lets you take that ledger and give everyone a copy of it. And so you could have 1,000 copies of this ledger. And so what that means is it's very, very hard to forge, to corrupt, because you would need to have 1,000 people all agreeing to change the record of that ledger, whereas with a centralized ledger that a bank holds, you just need one person to change that entry in order to, I'm oversimplifying, but that's basically the key difference. But I've described it in the context of financial services. Personally, I think that there are some profound opportunities for blockchain technology in areas beyond financial services, where we get into data architecture and changing the way we relate to the world around us. So all these Internet of Things devices that we read about are going to have data, and they're going to have little processors, and they could better store that data and manage it in some kind of distributed ledger, as opposed to a centralized database, which is more of a target for a hacker.
Would healthcare be one of the areas, or property, or that kind of infrastructure?
All of the above. And in fact, one of the most exciting areas, I think, is identity. And yet, it touches on financial services, because identity is the on-ramp for financial services. It's also the on-ramp for government benefits. It's the on-ramp for housing. It's the on-ramp for getting a job. Identity is a keystone for participating in society. And today, we exclude about 1.5 billion people in the world from having legal identity.
Right.
And so new digital technologies can help us sort of bring them into the financial system, and blockchain is a technology that can help make that sort of better, more robust, more scalable, more resilient.
Is this one of the missions in your life, to reach the unbankable or unbanked today?
Absolutely. So in addition to work on identity and the unknown, they are a subset of the somewhat larger 2 billion people in the world who are unbanked. And there are many reasons why they're unbanked, and it's holding back growth globally. There are also 200 million small businesses in the world. 95% of them don't have adequate access to the banking system. And the reason this is a problem is that small businesses create 80% of the new jobs. So if we want to grow the global economy and lift more people out of poverty, we need to help these small businesses. And there's a $2.6 trillion US credit gap right now that we have to fill. So I personally am working on a startup company called, aside from my work at MIT, working on a startup company called Distilled Analytics that is trying to help with this issue of better credit models that would let you bank the unbanked person, or let you extend credit in an intelligent fashion to a small business.
This podcast is going to millions of people within the emerging markets, including the Middle East and parts of Africa. You mentioned Africa earlier on, and you very interestingly said that that's the miracle that's about to happen, that we can reach out to. Could you explain that a wee bit more, please?
Absolutely. So, and I get myself into trouble when I say things like that, because there are many people who have been predicting the African economic miracle for decades, and it hasn't happened yet, or it's happened in parts, but not across the board. And so the things that I look at are digital inclusion, and digital inclusion then opens up things like identity and financial services and health services and other things. So there are right now about 1 billion phone subscribers in Africa. Right now there are about 200 million smartphone users in Africa, and that's going to grow to more like 500 million within 3 to 5 years. And the reason that's important is that once you have one of these devices, a smartphone of some kind in your pocket, you are able to engage with the world in a totally new way. You can learn new skills, you can do your banking, you can connect with your friends, you can do all sorts of things that are much, much harder to do if you're not digitally enabled, if you're not included in the digital world.
But Africa actually leapfrogged
Yes.
this entire space, and they went straight into the mobile space.
Absolutely.
And so is that really the key to connect to their mobile, connect to the cloud?
It's beyond mobile, it's the smartphone.
Okay.
If you add to this very deep mobile penetration the added element of the smartphone, now suddenly we have a recipe for transformation.
Yeah. We look at the growth of data on the one side. On the other side, we're looking at a young population coming on board, which are the millennials. And if you look at statistics, over 75% of the millennials want to transact with people that they are comfortable with and they trust. What are your thoughts on that in terms of how it will affect banks, it will affect insurance companies and all the financial institutions? Because the young people just don't trust them.
Yeah, well, it's a real problem. I mean, and it goes beyond the young people. So if you look at the three largest banks in the world, if I recall correctly, 2 of the 3 have negative net promoter scores, which is really bad. It means more of their customers don't like them than like them. And that's no way to run a business. So young people have grown up in an era where they've only seen bad things associated with banks. They saw, a financial crisis. They saw another financial crisis. They see bank CEOs going to jail. They see bank CEOs being fined. Yeah. And they really don't see much in the way of good press about banks. But what do they see good press about? They see good press about, their own personal experiences effectively, because their friends tell them on Facebook or Instagram, oh, I just had this great experience with Zappos. They sent me these shoes and they were so nice to me on the phone. Like, oh, I trust Zappos, or I trust Amazon, or I trust Google, or the list goes on. But there are a lot of these tech companies that young people work with that or use, and they do trust them. And so that creates a window of opportunity. So the case study for this is WeChat, right? And WeChat is now, they do everything for you. It's not just your communications platform. They have lending and current account products and all sorts of other things that they're able to do because they know who you are and they sort of have an embedded role in your life. And so young people trust those kinds of companies a lot more than like big banks.
One of the phrases that I use is data is the new oil. And we're in an oil environment, so it's quite relevant. Our intelligence and our thinking is the new gas, the new petrol that drives the engine. But it's trust and credibility that will drive the future. Is that something that you find when you go into the FinTech world and whatever resistance that you get, that you feel that trust is really the key?
Yeah, well, so we have an admitted bias because we put out a book called Trust Data. Okay. So if you go to visionaryfuture.com, you too can get a copy of Trust Data along with our FinTech book. So we thought about this question of what do we need to do to reinvent how people interact with the world to make it more natively digital and therefore better able to deal with fending off hackers and make it more useful and powerful. And trust is this essential factor that we've lost a lot. We've lost a lot of trust in our banks, and we've lost a lot of trust in our institutions. And so rebuilding trust is something I think we can do through technology and through proper use of data. There's absolutely an opportunity to do that.
The world is tilting towards data-centric companies, and it's going to Boston, it's going to Silicon Valley. Whether it's Elon Musk with an automobile industry
or as a lot of people call it, a computer that they happen to put a car chassis around.
Yes, indeed. So we've got a tilted playing field now.
Yeah.
My question is, do we need to cluster around Boston or San Francisco, or can we do it in Dubai? Can we do it in Singapore? Can we do it in other countries? Because now with connectivity and the cloud, geography should be less relevant.
Well, so yes and no. So you absolutely can do it. You can do it in Dubai. You can do it in Singapore. You can do it in Zurich. You can do it in London. There are other places besides Silicon Valley or New York or Boston. But the key thing is, you said the cloud, and I would say that our research has shown, and our research group that Professor Alex Pentland leads, says that rich channel communications, basically having a conversation like this, is much more powerful for changing someone's behavior or for coming up with a new idea than any email or video or any other thing that you could possibly send them. In fact, we've shown that email does not cause people to change behavior, and that happy, productive employees send 17% fewer emails per week.
Data is being, and you use the word fragmented, was something fresh that I learned today. Could you explain that a bit more and how it's influencing our behavior and our thinking?
Yeah, and it's data riding the channel of media. So what's happened, and this was kind of a free market effect, is that basically media organizations and journalists figured out they could get more audience and make more money off of advertising if they staked out really extreme positions, because those are more exciting. They get our neurons firing and we get all worked up. And so so you end up with news media that is at the extreme ends of the spectrum. And the other thing that has happened is that things like Facebook, our social media has gravitated in that manner, and other things that we read about or see during the day. And so it is possible to go through your entire day and never speak to a single person who disagrees with your worldview. That's actually unhealthy. That actually prevents people from thinking seriously about a topic and thinking on it from multiple
In terms of
perspectives.
critical thinking, because you can micro-target the person. Yeah.
Critical thinking, and I mean, there are a number of recent examples where voters acted against their own economic self-interests and acted against things that they believed in because of this sort of manipulation of the media.
So where is media going, in your opinion? Is this going into this polarized world? Is it
It's already in the polarized world. It's already there.
Is it coming
Yeah.
back together? Will we get true journalism and true authentic engagement, which I've been used to because of my background?
Sure.
Is that the future differentiator?
Well, so I'll try and think of how to answer this question succinctly. This is like a really big question.
Yes.
What I'd like to see happen is for us to be able to find more common spaces where we can talk to people who have a different point of view and actually kind of have an intelligent discussion. And so, whichever end of the political spectrum you sit on with respect to the recent U.S. election, I think everyone can agree that Donald Trump is a polarizing figure. That there are some people who really, really think he's amazing, and there are some people who really, really think he's awful. And one of the most interesting things I saw recently was on Reddit.com. There's the community website where there's a place you can go to ask questions of Trump voters. And it's not a place for trolls. It's not a place that's obnoxious. This is a place where people can genuinely ask, so why did you vote for Donald Trump? Or what do you think about his healthcare policy? Or what do you think about his tax policy? Or what do you think about how he treats the rich? And get an honest answer from someone who might have voted differently than you. And so I think that's a wonderful thing that it exists. I don't see enough of that going on where people with different points of view actually end up talking to each other.
Let's talk about big data, which is effectively taking over our lives in many, many ways. And then if you put a layer of artificial intelligence on top of it, and then a bit of cognitive thinking on top of it, and Watson and so on, and 90% of our brain, on the left side of our brain, is being taken over by these engines. So we're only left with imagination and intuition and creativity and the warmth and relationships and those wonderful things. Is that where the future is, in your view, and going back to values and going back to basics? Or is that too soft a question to a FinTech expert?
Okay, so I actually spend a lot of time thinking about innovation science, and so the question is very apt. My view of where that is going, so part of what you're describing is this idea that AI might take over the world, that it's already taking over big parts of the world. And I'm a proponent of what people call the centaur theory. Centaur is this mythical creature that's half horse and half man. Yes. And so if you apply that to the human-machine experience, or what we're calling augmented intelligence, the best chess player in the world is not Watson. The best chess player in the world is a mid-ranked human chess player and a good AI. And so this notion of these centaurs, these hybrid or blended models, is where I think the future is going. And so you talked about this idea of people need to be more creative, and the answer is absolutely. I mean, I think creativity and ingenuity and intuition are things that thus far we have not been able to teach computers how to do.
Yeah. What about technology versus humanity? Because what are the kinds of social constructs do we need to rethink in terms of the technology can balloon and become huge, but how do we overlay our humanity and how do we really just manage that? And what's that crossover point where they'll go beyond management?
Right.
And what do we need to do to avoid that in terms of compliance, in terms of all of those good things?
The kind of notion of how do we grapple with humanity in the face of technology disruption is something that many people have been struggling with for years. For my part, the way we've dealt with it is that we've done things like in our big data and social analytics class, so we put a class online that we taught about big data, we included a substantial portion of ethics content.
Okay.
Because once you get into big data, you inevitably are drawn into that question of data is the new oil.
Yes.
But when you say data is the new oil, what you really mean is my data is your oil.
Yes.
And so that has very profound ethical implications for you and for me.
Yes.
And so one way that I'm trying to help with that is to train data scientists as they're at the beginnings of their careers on thinking differently about how they do what they do and why they do what they do. So Edward Teller was this physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project in the United States and helped create the atomic bomb. And after he saw the explosion and realized with horror what he had created, he purportedly said, I am, he quoted Shiva, he said, I have become death, destroyer of worlds. And so this is really, something to think about in the realm of, because data science could be even more profoundly invasive in our lives.
Stephen Hawking has said exactly this, and Elon Musk has said on AI exactly that, because we regulate. He calls it the nukes of the future. And basically where we are is that everything is regulated. Nuclear energy is regulated. Oil is regulated. Financial markets are regulated.
Sure.
The only thing that's not regulated today is data, and it's just exploding.
Well, and it's getting regulated, though. I mean, this is where, so the European Commission has put in place, the European Union has put in place a series of rules around what can be done with your personal data. So you now have what's known as the right of dispossession, which means, so right now, when we sign up for something, we want to use Facebook or Instagram or any of these sites, you have to click on this thing that says, I accept. And when you click I accept, you've just given your personal data to them and you have no way to get it back. Even if you leave, if you delete your account, if you quit, they still own your data.
Yeah.
And so the European Union said this isn't right and we're going to change the rules so that you have the ability to basically get your data back or opt out more easily. And so it is starting to get regulated, but it is by no means widespread, as we know from living anywhere but the European Union.
Do you have children?
I do. I have 2 children. Yeah.
How old are they?
8 and 10.
Now, in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, by the time we see singularity in this world, they will be growing up. Do you think they'll ever drive a car? Do you think they will ever need to own a car? And how will the social constructs change?
So maybe on the drive a car, and no, they will never need to own a car.
Okay.
It'll change a lot of courtship rituals for young people.
Yeah.
It'll change a lot of rites of passage, right? So the going to take driving lessons when you're a teenager, and then having your parent take you out and help you learn with your permit how to drive, and then you finally get your license. I mean, this is how the system works in the U.S.
Yes. Exactly.
That all is going to go away because we just pick up our phone and we hit Uber, and Uber picks us up and drives us somewhere.
In terms of their learning and education, one of the phrases that I use, education is dead, long live learning.
Yes.
And then learning how to learn and so on. How do you actually empower your children, since you're a scientist yourself, and you mentioned that your wife is in the healthcare sector, so you are the really future advanced parents.
Well,
how do you deal with that, and what do you tell them?
This is, I mean, I do try and limit their screen time, because it turns out it's really important that we learn how to interact in the real world. Yeah. And I do try and provide them varied and diverse experiences, but I also don't pretend to hide under the rock of Luddism the saying that all technology is bad or evil. So I bought them laptops, and I've bought them what I consider to be better games for the Xbox. So like Let's Dance, which is an actual sort of exercise game that's fun, rather than buying them games with lots of guns and killing people.
Sure. David, you've been very, very indulgent with your time. We're very grateful. Are there any things that I may have missed that you'd like to mention? Any core messaging to the emerging markets that we are addressing, or to young people in this region, either on FinTech or on technology in general?
Yeah, so I would say that this is a time of tremendous opportunity. I would say that young people should be fearless and bold. They should take risk. Now is a time where the world is changing so fast that you can create a new future for yourself if you're willing to take that leap.
One final question, which culturally is very difficult in this part of the world, and that is the word failure. This country, this part of the world, does not understand, culturally or otherwise, the meaning of failure. While in Silicon Valley or in Boston, we tinker and we fail and we learn, and that's literally something that you work with.
Yes. It's an expression. Fail fast.
Fail fast, fail forward. So what are your thoughts in terms of failure within this kind of FinTech space and the technology space? Because the vast majority of the companies over the next 5 years are not going to make it.
Absolutely. So failure, 90% or more of startups are going to fail. Statistically, this is what we know from decades of starting companies and looking at startups. And so it's important that people understand that is a natural and healthy evolution. In fact, what I tell innovation executives or people at big companies or entrepreneurs, if you're not failing 80% of the time, you are not taking enough risk. You are not trying enough new things. So failure is actually healthy and important. And so I would advise both the young people who are thinking about maybe starting something, and also the other folks around them, employers who might hire someone after their startup, or investors who might look at someone who had a business that didn't work out and now they're raising money again, and say, here's an opportunity potentially to have someone who is older and wiser, if you would, and has learned from certain experiences, and that this is a natural part of a healthy startup ecosystem.
Let's imagine that we're in a time capsule and we projected ourselves to your 85th birthday. And so David's there and everybody's come to sort of see you there. What will we be celebrating? What has David achieved? What is his legacy?
He's helped 1 billion people in the world enter the financial system.
And what are these people saying?
So they're saying, I was able to get a loan and build my business because David's company helped me out. I mean, that would be something that I would like to see happen in the world, and that's the kind of challenge that we put forward to the young people we teach in our classes. We have a whole entrepreneurship program, and we say to them, solve a problem for 1 billion people.
Yes.
We don't expect all of them to magically have companies that scale to 1 billion people, but we want them to think big, to be audacious, to make a difference.
David, real pleasure, real privilege.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.